Hey, what's going on? Welcome back to Iron Anchor Cycles. So, don't have a super long video for you today, but I was in the middle of doing this project here on this Lowrider S, and I decided this was a great opportunity to maybe show you guys something we haven't shown before. And what we're doing here, if it's not obvious, is we are eliminating the turn signals and side mount license plate off this bike. But we're actually doing that for a specific purpose, which is that this customer bought a set of Leather Pros saddlebags, wants to put them on, and obviously the turn signals sticking off the side here are not gonna work. Now, there are a lot of ways to do this, and different options and different lights and configurations of things you can do. And in fact, if you go back to maybe a year or two ago, and I'll try and find the video we did, and I'll put a link up there if I can figure out how to do it. If not, put it down in the description. But we did a similar setup on this for somebody who had same bike, Dyna Lowrider S, wanted to run Leather Pros, and rather than doing all of this, basically just decided to go a different route, which was converting from the Street Bob fender to a full regular Dyna fender. So when you do that, obviously it gives you the ability to mount a tail light and the license plate right onto the fender. In the tail light, you could do the integrated turn signals like custom dynamic cells. So we go through that version of doing this project in that video. But in this case, the customer didn't want to swap his fender, was just looking for something, a different kind of a solution. So we pulled some parts and put together what I think is a pretty slick design. So the first thing that we've got going on here is if you look over here at this fender, or this fender strut, it's not done yet. Like I said, I sort of stopped kind of in the middle here, and I'll sort of work backwards and show you what we did. I'll come over to the other side. But basically we've got now the Leather Pro mount here. And in addition to that, the customer also wanted to make accommodations to put a sissy bar on. So we've got the Harley quick detach hardware. That's another piece of this puzzle that's sitting here under the Leather Pro mount. That's in the rear. And then up here in the front, in the front. And then back here in the rear, we've got one of my favorite products, the Alloy Art fender strut turn signals. So we've got these put in here as well. And then we're gonna stack on top of that the bolt along with the docking mount and the Leather Pro mount. That's one side of it. Obviously, we've got a taillight bracket here. There's a bunch of different choices for these. This is the most simple one you can do. No lights or anything in it. This is just a plain bracket to put a tail light on. Obviously, there's not gonna be a license plate light here, but customer doesn't mind, and personally, that's probably what I would do too. Sorry if there's any DOT officials or traffic officers watching, my bad. But so this is more or less what it's gonna look like. Now, the reason I wanted to get into this and show it to you is there are a lot of steps and a lot of different parts you need to stack on top of each other and get it all modified to work properly. So that's kind of what the video is gonna be about. And just coincidentally, in the background here, this is not a Lowrider S, this is a Street Bob, but as hopefully you can see from these two fenders here, this is the same part from Harley. So we're talking about Dynas, not M8 Softails here. So the Dyna Street Bob rear fender is the same setup as the Dyna Lowrider S rear fender. So it's a pretty apples to apples swap in terms of parts. Now, obviously what's been done here is there is a little bit of modification. These look like they could be original turn signals, but the mount has been changed, and this bike does have the docking hardware for a sissy bar. What it looks like was on this bike, there's a little bracket here, is just a set of soft, like thrashing bags or something like that, that throw over the rear fender. And these turn signals in this location, I guess, probably work for that. If you wanted to run Leather Pros on this bike, you'd have to do the same thing as you did on this bike, but it gives you kind of the idea of what we're talking about, eliminating the turn signal and license plate brackets off the side. Now, talking a little bit about the parts and how this all works. So one thing, and before I get into the parts and how it all works, I want to talk about the rear wheel is obviously off. Now, this is tremendously easier to do with the rear wheel removed. For our customer, he actually needed a new tire as well. So took the wheel off, changed the tire, it's ready to go back on, but it's obviously a lot more room under here to work. So that's how we're doing it. Could you do this by just jacking up the bike or maybe disconnecting the shocks and making some more room there? Yeah, you probably could, but definitely a lot easier to get in there with all these pieces and wrenches and such if you take the wheel off. But anyway, talking about the parts. So the way this works is you've got inside your fender some big sort of metal bracket kind of pieces that look like this. This is the stock setup. Now, what makes this different than what you need is that This is basically, you've got two mounting points here, 1, 2 on your fender. Now the forward one is threaded because what comes out of here is just a bolt. But on the rear one, it's just a through hole because the bolt actually runs the other way. It comes from the inside, runs through this bracket and screws into a blind hole in the backside of the turn signal. So in order to do all of this, where now the bolts are gonna be coming from the outside, you replace these with, and I'm sorry, they're already in the bike and I'm not gonna take them out, but basically the exact same thing. And it comes with the Harley docking point hardware, which basically has threaded holes on both sides because now your docking points are gonna run through there. Now, there's a lot of replicated parts in what we're doing here, so this is where it gets a little bit complicated. So I'm just gonna come over here. What comes with that docking point kit is these two chrome bolts that are here. So they would run through your docking points and into that new piece that comes with the docking kit, and you'd put your docking points on. Well, we're not just running the docking points, we also want to put the Leather Pros mounts on here. So Leather Pros includes with their kit, I'll show you this too, two different sets of bolts. Now here is a set of bolts that comes with the Leather Pros for if you're not running the docking hardware. So now these will just thread directly through and go in, and you ask yourself, well, what are they gonna screw into because I still have this old piece because I didn't buy the docking hardware kit. They make it simple, they just include some nuts that go on the back side and you eliminate this piece entirely. If you are running the docking hardware, Leather Pros includes longer bolts now so that they will accommodate both the leather point docking piece and the sissy bar docking piece, and these are gonna thread through. Now, of course, you could just run the nuts that come with the Leather Pros kit, but since we have the big brackets and it's just easier to not have to hold the nut and do all of that, and it maybe makes it a little bit more rigid, I don't know. We're gonna use that piece that came with the docking hardware kit, and we're gonna thread these into that. I'm sorry, I feel like I've just been talking for a long time and this is all really long-winded, but I'm hoping that for anyone who has one of these bikes that this might be helpful for me to go through all these different little intricate details to help you figure out what parts you need. So in any event, that would be more or less the beginning and the end of it, except that we want to add these alloy art fender strut turn signals on. Now, I'm gonna bring you over to the other side of the bike and I'll show you what we did, but basically the complication, and always is the case when you install these, is that in a typical Harley setup, when you have the two holes here, you know what, let's go over to the other side of the bike and I'll show you on that side because it's gonna make a whole lot more sense. So, one sec. Okay, so over here, you can see what I'm talking about. You've got two holes in your fender strut. Now, the way a typical Harley turn signal mounts is that your bolt runs through the rear one and the wires run through the forward one. Obviously, in the case of the alloy art fender struts, the light is in the rear, so the wires are in the rear. So what that means is, it's not so simple as just put a bolt through this hole and run the wires through this hole. You can't do that because that's not the way it's set up. So you have to figure out a way to get the wires back here. Now, every bike is a little different in terms of what's the easiest modification to do to get this to work. In this case, because on the Street Bobs, they don't have the large strut covers on them, there's quite a bit of room in front of the strut, but that's still covered by the light here. And actually you can kind of see an outline of it in here. The strut is gonna come all the way, out to where those wires are. So what we do is we drill a small hole, and this is actually a pretty big hole, into the fender. And the reason it's much bigger it needs to be is because we run a grommet in there. So the grommet is actually on the wire right now. So basically what we're gonna do is we're gonna feed this through, we're gonna put the grommet in place, it's gonna hold that wire nice and tight, keep it protected. We obviously put some paint in here to keep any rust from happening. So all that's gonna be covered and your wires are gonna be protected. And then basically what it'll do is the wires will run up and along the inside of the fender through the original channel that's in there for the wires to go. And what we've done is just soldered on the original turn signal wires here in order to connect the alloy art strut lights. Now, the wiring on these is a little bit less than straightforward when you have a bike like this that doesn't have a tail light. I'm not gonna talk about that right now. I'm gonna talk about that when we get to actually plugging these in, and I'll talk to you about what your options are with or without a BCM flash to make these work the way they're supposed to. So stick around for that. But in any event, where we are right now is I had just put the one turn signal on the other side. I was about to put this one on and decided I should do a video on it. So ultimately what's gonna happen here is we're gonna get all of these things stacked on top of each other. So when I say stacked on top of each other, it's a lot of new parts. We've got a license plate bracket, we've got a sissy bar mount, we've got saddlebag mounts, we've got turn signals, and all that is gonna get sandwiched all in the right order so that it all works together and looks correct on the bike. So hopefully you can see how this is coming together. And certainly you could do any of these or all of these modifications with or without the saddlebags, but hopefully it makes sense that what the customer was ultimately trying to do here was run saddlebags and come up with a nice way to relocate all the junk that is hanging off the side of the bike from the factory. So the turn signal mount and the license plate mount and the turn signals. So enough world's longest intro, I think, there, and I apologize for that. But anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and continue to get this stuff put together. Now, we've done some modification here. One thing we needed to do was the replacements for these, they look almost exactly the same. This little tab deal here at the end, these go on this way. This was in the way of the license plate bracket. So basically what we just did was we just cut it off and just rounded it basically to make it match the front side. So that's one piece of modification we did. Obviously we drilled the holes, painted them with the grommets. Everything else is pretty much as the instructions or what your inclination would be as to how this stuff installs. So what I'm gonna do from here is, if I can stay in the camera shot, yeah, that's good. I'm gonna go ahead and start to feed these wires through, and we'll get this other turn signal mocked in place. Now, because of the turn signal bracket back here, it's a little bit of a tight clearance, but it all does fit through. I'm sorry, not turn signal bracket, I keep saying that, the license plate bracket. It all fits through. It's just a little tight as you're trying to just feed the beginnings of these wires through, but actually the license plate bracket being there actually helps to just direct the wiring harness up and out of the way where it needs to be. All right, so let's just pull this through. It's just the section with the solders in it. It's a little tight there, but we'll get it. There we go. Okay. And also worth mentioning here is that the alloy art wires just come bare the whole way, and you can cut them to length. They don't have ends on them or anything. So we've left the length intact. It's probably a little more than we need, but a little more is better than a little less. And then I just wrap the whole thing in wiring harness tape. So get here. Now I'm gonna have to squeeze this grommet on now. It might be easier if you don't have all this stuff in the way to put the grommet in first and run the wires through it, but as I learned the hard way on the other side, the point where we have all the solders, and we could have staggered them if I was thinking ahead, but I didn't. So all the solders are right next to each other. It'll fit through the grommet when the grommet is free, but when the grommet's in the hole, the solder section won't fit through. So do it this way. That's how I did it on the other side. It worked pretty well. So I'm just gonna go ahead and get this grommet pushed into place here. So with the grommet in place, we'll just keep feeding the wire through and get our turn signal kind of mocked up in place there. All right, so that's about where that is gonna live. Hope you can see that. And now I'm just gonna go ahead and just route this wire up and over the bracket for the license plate. And we are golden. All right, so I'm gonna come back and we'll do the wiring after. What I wanna do is get our bolts put in and get the fender nice and centered and straight, get our license plate bracket where we want it, get all this tightened down, and then we'll keep going from there. All right, with some Loctite on our bolt, we're gonna get everything lined up here as it needs to be, and we'll get this bolt through the turn signal, the strut, the license plate bracket, and we get it all started through. And if you got it lined up, you should just be able to thread it on nicey nice. Okay. Now there's definitely some play in it, so you kind of have to just you just look at it and get it straight and centered the way you like it, and then you can get it tightened down. So our wires are good, our light is nice and straight, and license plate bracket is tucked up here. So I'm gonna go ahead and start to tighten this a little bit. Okay. Now the other side, see. Okay, all right, the camera's gonna be in the way here, or I'm gonna be in the way of the camera, but what I'm trying to do here is just look and make sure we get this to go on straight. There's definitely play in these fenders, so I'm just gonna tighten a little bit at a time on all 4 of our points here, and hopefully get it nice and straight on the first attempt. Now, a couple things worth noting. If you've ever done these Harley docking points before, they are not perfectly round, and that's by design. You can turn them just to make them tighter or looser on the sissy bar. So I guess we could do that right now, is mock up the sissy bar on here, and maybe I will, to get these at the right tension on each side. My original plan was just to loosen them back up again when we needed to do that, but I guess for right now, might as well just try and throw the sissy bar on and see how it fits. So let me grab that. Let's see how we do here. Okay. Actually feels pretty perfect on the first attempt. So there it is. Obviously, customer hasn't got a pad for this yet. This all just came out of the box, all going on for the first time. So that feels good. I'm gonna stand back behind the camera, hopefully get a sense of if that fender is straight or not. It looks a little bit crooked to me at the moment. I know I don't know if you can see it on the camera. It's a little hard to tell straight or crooked when the bike is on the lift, because they don't stand up perfectly straight. They usually lean a little bit one way or the other. So what I'm gonna do is, these are very easy to loosen up and change. I'm just gonna keep going along here, and we'll get the bike back on the wheels and maybe put it on the ground. We'll stand it up with a center stand. I don't know, we'll figure out a way to get the bike to stand up straight so we can check this. But for right now, let me actually take the sissy bar off, and, well, actually I can leave it for right now. So what I wanna do from here is we're gonna start running these wires up. Now, these are obviously depinned, and they need to be in order to fit through all these holes. You would have had to depin these connectors on the turn signals when you took them off. I suppose you could have just cut the ends off to take the turn signals off, but you're gonna need these ends, and you're gonna need them depinned to put it back together, so you might as well just do that in the beginning. So what we're gonna do here is, there are these little, I don't even know what you'd call them. There's like a little plastic sort of clips in here. And we're gonna run the wires up through those clips and through the pre-existing hole up in the front of the fender. Okay. Yeah, definitely a lot longer than these needed to be. We got probably an extra 12 inches of slack here. So if you're doing this, you could probably take a little bit off if you want to, but I figured a little extra wire, not gonna hurt anybody. Okay. All right, so what I'm doing here is I'm sort of tossing the wire off to each respective side of the bike, so we know out at the wiring harness which is the right side and which is the left side. So from here, I'm gonna reposition the camera, probably drop the bike down a little bit, and show you how we deal with these wiring connections, talk about your options, and then then we'll do probably a BCM flash. So stick around. Okay, so wiring these alloy art lights is always a little bit complicated. And the reason for that is they give you a lot of flexibility with them, but also every Harley's a little bit different in terms of how the rear lighting is set up. The biggest difference, and the one we're gonna run into today, is does the bike have a tail light or not? And the reason why that matters is it has to do with the programming of the BCM in the bike, and I'll explain that a little bit. So if a Harley does not have a tail light on it, and think about a lowrider S, a street bob, or really a lot of the baggers, right? So like street glides and road glides that just have those bullet turn signals that act as brake lights and running lights as well. The way that works is there's not a brake light signal per se running to the back of the bike. There only really needs to be a turn signal wire and a running light wire. And the way that the computer operates the brake light is by just turning both turn signals on solid and bright at the same time. So you'll have either, dual brightness LEDs or dual filament halogen bulbs in the case of the OE ones, and you'll have your running light going to the low power circuit and your turn signal and brake light going to the high power circuit. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, fortunately, I don't think because they were looking out for us, but just because Harley, I think, is probably, it's just about laziness and part compatibility. The wiring harnesses on the bike side, you actually have the provisions for those extra wires. So just dropped my little plug. So if we look at the harness that goes to the back of this bike, the first one is we've got this third extra one over here. Now this ran to the taillight, I keep saying that, the license plate assembly. It only had 2 wires coming out of it and it was for a license plate light. Now, you've got 4 wires in this plug, and based on the colors of them, I have some ideas about what some of these other wires might be, but we're not gonna be using any of those, so I'm gonna put it to the side. On the turn signal wires, you've got your left and right side identified by this tape that they put on there, and you've got 4 wires. There is a black wire, which is your ground, and then next in line is a blue wire with either a purple or a brown stripe, and those are turn signals left and right. And then after that, you've got a solid blue wire, which is your running light. And then the 4th wire in these plugs, which was unused in the previous configuration, is a blue wire with a red stripe on it, which should be your brake light. So that wire doesn't get used in the circumstance of this bike, but we're gonna use it on these alloy art lights, and I'll explain that a little bit. So your alloy art lights have 4 wires on them as well, and just those same exact ones. It's a ground, a turn signal for each side, a running light for each side, and a brake light for each side. Now, the complication for these is that alloy art makes these lights work in a couple of different ways. So they actually have dual color LEDs in them. So your turn signals are amber and your running lights and brake lights are red. Now, if you were to just wire this in the standard way, hopefully you can see what the problem is gonna be, which is that because the turn signals are amber and the bike, when you hit your brakes, the computer is saying, just give me turn signals on both sides, you're gonna have amber brake lights, which obviously you don't want. Now, you have 2 options to wire these lights in. One is with a BCM flash to make the lights work the way they're supposed to, but the other option is you could just wire them the same way that Harley did theirs. So you would lose the amber turn signals and they would just be red instead. So what you would do is you would use that brake light circuit as your turn signal circuit, and you'd wire the turn signals from the bike into the brake light wires, which don't think of it as a brake light, just think of it as high intensity red, so that when the brakes are pressed, they'll both turn on solid red together, and when you put the turn signal on, it's gonna flash red left or right, respectively. We're gonna do it the right way, and we're gonna wire it the way it should be wired using the amber turn signals, and we'll flash the BCM to tell the bike it has a tail light. Now, obviously it doesn't have a tail light, but the bike doesn't think about it in terms of a physical device, it's about the wires. And yes, it has a separate lighting circuit for a tail light. So that's what we're gonna do. You obviously could do it either way. I just figured it's easier to run through all this and explain it to you, because what will happen is, and I've had people do this, and I think Alloy Art must have too, because they note it on their website, is you don't even think about the BCM when you're doing this. You wire it all up, brake to brake, turn signal, you do all that, you get out, you turn the bike on, everything looks like it's working, you hit the brakes and they're amber, and you're like, what did I do wrong? So you have to flash the BCM. So basically what I'm gonna do is start pinning these harnesses back together, and it shouldn't take very long. What you want to do when you are depinning wires, if you're too lazy to go to the service manual, is just take a picture of how it came apart, and you can just repin your wires the same way, and you'll know you got it correct. So I'm going to start over here, and I don't know, this might just take a couple of seconds, but all right, so with our connectors back on, or repinned I should say, I'm gonna go ahead and plug these in here. And I will bring you around to the back of the bike and I'll show you what we got going on. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn this on. And what we should see here is we should see low intensity red LEDs, that's correct. For our turn signals, we should see a flashing amber on the right side, and then a flashing amber on the left side. So we're good so far. Now here's the problem. Brakes, amber. So what has happened there is exactly what I said, and you're basically feeding your brake signal through your turn signals, which are amber instead of the red lights. So now what we need to do is we're just gonna plug the laptop in. We're gonna just change that setting in the BCM, and we should be good to go. So I'm gonna flip this off. Let me grab my laptop, and we'll get that squared away. All right, got the laptop ready to go. Turn the bike on. And let's get going. And now we're gonna come to our stoplight. And I can never remember if it's enable or disable. I think it's, in this case, I think it's disable is what we're trying to do, but we'll try it both ways. If it doesn't work the first way, we'll do the second thing. All right, so that says it worked. So let's see what happens with our brake. There we go. All right, so I can't see the other side, but yep. All right, so we've got red brake lights and we've got amber turn signals as it's supposed to be. So we're good to go. All right, so the last thing I want to do here is I'm going to shut this down. I'm going to exit. We're just going to do BCM sync just to get all the turn signals working properly. So the way we do that is we turn on our hazard lights, power the bike off, and you should see it do like a double flash. There it goes. So it's going to turn off, turn back on, and now they'll start blinking. It's going to do sort of a crazy thing. There we go. So we should be good to go. Usually what I do here is I'll just let it kind of do this for a minute or two. So I'm gonna leave this on while I put the laptop away, and then we'll come back and we'll continue with the rest of the install. All right, so from here, I think it's time to get the wheel put back in. All right, so we've got the rear end pretty much buttoned back up now. I do have two more parts to go on back here that are unrelated to what we're doing here, but I figured we've got the video going, might as well show you. We've got a set of 14-inch Legend shocks to go on here. We're also going to be doing Bung King's rear frame sliders here as well that go on in the upper shock mounts. So Totally probably could have done the shocks while the tire was off, all that stuff. Was trying to just keep this segmented to the things that were related to one another. So we still got the jack under here. We're just gonna take the weight off the rear tire so we can get these shocks unbolted, and we'll get the new ones put on there along with the Bung King sliders. So I'll show you that stuff going on, and then we'll get this bike down on the ground and we'll take it for a ride. All right, so the old shock's off. Putting on the new ones should be just as simple as sliding this on up here using the original hardware and getting rolling. And obviously you can see how much additional height we're gonna have out of these. But because we're installing the Bung King frame sliders, we have an intermediate step we need to take care of. So basically what's gonna happen is these mounts that are here on the frame, we're gonna remove the nuts on the inside. We're gonna put the frame slider in with the spacers. The shock will go in here, and then this will become the hardware for the upper mount of the shock. So I'm just gonna grab some wrenches and we'll get these removed, and then we'll show you how it all goes together. Okay, we're ready to go. I've got the bike jacked up, hopefully pretty close to align with what it needs to be. We've got our shock and we've got our frame slider here. So let's talk about the order that these things go on. We've also got a couple of spacers down here on the table that come with the shock. So we'll start by removing the nut and washer. We've got a large spacer that comes with the Bung King slider. I'm gonna put that aside for the moment. The small spacer, this is gonna stay on. This would be followed by the shock, but Legend has a small spacer that goes on the outside of the shock. We're then gonna make sure we're facing the right direction here. Put the shock on next, followed by Legend's bigger spacer, followed by the big spacer that comes with the shock, the frame slider, and this is ready to go on. So this does not need Loctite because it's got a lock nut on it, but you know what? Not gonna hurt anything to put a little on there. Let's go ahead and slide this through and put our washer followed by the nut. Okay, so what that's gonna do is give us the proper alignment on the bottom. That's gonna use the other large slider, or other large spacer from Legend, and it's gonna keep everything nice and lined up the way it should be, and the frame sliders will be sticking out the right distance. Obviously, you got a lot of spacer going on up here, but that's what you have to do in order to compensate for, let me show you here, the original mount on the shock, right? That's what this large spacer is doing. It's taking the place of this large piece that was sticking out. And then you have the spacers from Legend, number 1 and number 2, to just push the shock out to where it needs to be for the proper clearances. So with that side on, I'm gonna take a look, and we are pretty close to aligned here. So you can see how this bottom section goes. So we've got our small washer on the outside, through the shock, large one on the inside, some Loctite, Okay. And then our top bolt, need a wrench to hold that big nut. All right, so we've got this side on. Let's take a look at our alignment. Looks pretty good. So I'm gonna grab a torque wrench. We're gonna torque both of these bolts, go over and do the same thing on the other side. All right, so its factory spec is 40 foot-pounds, so that's what we did there. So we've still got plenty of movement here, just like this should be with the spherical bearings that are in there. We've got our rebound adjuster set to 3, which is right in the middle, which is a good starting place. So this side is done. Go over and do the other side, and we'll be wrapped up. All right, so that's our second side done. We've got this job just about 99% of the way done. Very last thing, and almost always needs to be done, but definitely always needs to be checked, is belt tension. Can't tell you how many jacked up bikes you see come in here, people that did this themselves and forgot to check the belt tension. This is gonna be crazy loose now because of how much we just lifted the bike up. So that's why we didn't torque the axle before when I was putting the wheel back on, because I knew we were gonna have to loosen it again. So I'm gonna go ahead and adjust the belt tension here. We'll get that squared away and then we'll be done. Take the bike down, take it for a ride. All right, so here it is all done. Obviously I've got the one bag put on this side, about to put on the other one. Just figured I'd give you a shot of the bike here on the ground as it sits. I think the 14-inch height on a Dyna is really perfect, honestly. And truly, the rear full fender, I much prefer to the short one. I think a lot of people are going that route now. But you can actually even see it compared to these two bikes. I mean, you can still see the Street Bob over there. Adding this taillight bracket, or sorry, I keep doing that, license plate bracket, does give the illusion of the full fender. And I think it looks much better with this little bit of extra material here than with it just, you know, chopped short, particularly once it's raised up high. That rear fender starts to look a little silly in my opinion when it's cut like that and its bike's lifted up. But anyway, this is where we're at. Leather Pros, if you're not familiar with these are the best bags ever made. They keep updating them. They're super strong, well designed, well made, and they come on and off about as easily as possible. So just slide this on here and give it a click. Oop, it locks in the way. There we go. Boom. Click, click, done. So that's our final product. You know, you got to imagine probably the sissy bar is not going to be on here all the time, but we put it on, one, just to make sure it fits, but two, because obviously the customer's got to leave with it. So easier to have it attached to the bike than not. But yeah, like I said, I'm pretty happy with it. I think it's going to do exactly what the customer wants. So it's going to wrap it up for this one. Hopefully you found it useful or enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time.